Behind the curated perfection of a young Colorado family's life on social media lay a web of deceit, betrayal, and mounting pressure that culminated in an act of unfathomable violence, shattering the illusion and exposing the dark reality within. August 2018. Frederick, Colorado. On the surface, the Watts family seemed to be living the American dream. Shanann Watts, a driven and charismatic mother, filled her social media with images of domestic bliss. Two beautiful daughters, Bella, 4, and Celeste, affectionately called Cece, 3, a handsome, seemingly devoted husband, Chris, and a third child, a son to be named Nichol, on the way. Shanann was a prominent promoter for the multi-level marketing company Lavelle, selling their Thrive product line. Her online persona was one of success, happiness, and a perfect family life. She chronicled their every milestone, their joys, and even sometimes their struggles, always framed with an optimistic outlook. Chris and Shanann met in 2010 in North Carolina. He was, by many accounts, shy and quiet. She was outgoing and vivacious. Opposites attracted, and they married in November 2012. Soon after, they moved to Colorado, chasing new opportunities and starting their family. They bought a spacious new home in Frederick, a symbol of their aspirations. Bella arrived in December 2013, Celeste in July 2015. To the outside world, and certainly to Shanann's vast online audience, they were thriving. But behind the carefully curated images and enthusiastic posts, a different reality was taking shape. Financial pressures, though often downplayed by Shanann publicly, were a significant stressor. The couple had declared bankruptcy in 2015, burdened by mortgage payments, HOA fees, student loans, and credit card debt. Shanann's job with Lavelle required constant engagement, travel, and maintaining that image of success. Chris worked as an operator for Anadarko Petroleum. While he was seen as a good provider, there were underlying tensions about their lifestyle and spending. In the summer of 2018, these existing pressures were compounded by a seismic shift in Chris Watts's life, an extramarital affair. This would prove to be the catalyst that accelerated the disintegration of their carefully constructed world. In late May or early June of 2018, while Shanann and the girls were in North Carolina visiting her family for an extended 5-week trip, Chris Watts began an affair with a co-worker from Anadarko, Nichol Kessinger. Kessinger later told investigators that Chris had claimed he was in the final stages of a mutual separation from Shanann. He painted a picture of a dying marriage, portraying himself as a victim eager to move on. He told her his divorce would be final soon. He never mentioned Shanann was pregnant. While Chris was cultivating this new relationship, Shanann, miles away in North Carolina, began to notice a change in him. He seemed distant, less communicative. Their interactions, once filled with affection, became strained. Shanann confided in friends about her growing concerns. She noticed Chris was losing weight, seemed indifferent to her pregnancy, and was becoming increasingly cold. The 5-week trip to North Carolina was fraught with this underlying tension. Shanann, ever the optimist in her public persona, tried to maintain a brave face, but privately she was deeply troubled. She shared her marital woes with her mother, Sandy, and her father, Frank. On August 7th, Shanann and the girls returned to Colorado. The atmosphere in the Watts home was palpably tense. Chris was uncharacteristically detached. Shanann hoped a weekend business trip to Arizona for a Lavelle conference might give them some space, or perhaps jolt Chris into realizing what he was, jeopardizing. On Friday, August 10th, Shanann flew to Arizona, leaving Bella and Celeste in Chris's care. This weekend would be the last time she saw her daughters alive, and the last weekend of her own life. During that weekend, Chris continued his affair with Kessinger. He even took the girls to a child's birthday party on Saturday, where other parents noted nothing unusual about his behavior. Later that evening, he arranged for a babysitter and went out on a date with Kessinger. He was living a double life, one that was rapidly approaching an impossible crossroads. Shanann's return flight from Arizona on Sunday, August 12th, was delayed. Her friend, Nichol Atkinson, who had also been on the trip, was scheduled to pick her up from the airport and drop her home. This was the last time anyone, apart from her killer, would see Shanann Watts alive. What exactly transpired inside that house in the pre-dawn hours has been pieced together from Chris Watts's various confessions, each version more horrifying than the last. According to Chris's later, more detailed confession, he and Shanann had an emotional, possibly heated, conversation after she arrived home. Shanann, 15 weeks pregnant with their son Nico, confronted Chris about his detachment, his affair, and the state of their marriage. Chris claimed that during this confrontation, he told Shanann he didn't love her anymore and wanted a separation. He alleged that Shanann then threatened him, saying he would never see his children again. It was at this point, Chris stated, that he snapped and strangled Shanann in their bed. The horror did not end there. Chris then described how, after killing Shanann, Bella and Celeste woke up. Bella, he said, walked into their bedroom and saw him wrapping Shanann's body in a sheet. She asked, "What's wrong with Mommy?" In an act of almost unimaginable cruelty, Chris Watts loaded Shanann's body into the bed of his work truck. He then put his two young daughters, Bella and Celeste, alive and likely terrified, into the back seat of the same truck. His destination was a remote oilwork site, Survey 319, operated by Anadarko Petroleum, about an hour's drive away. With the bodies of his wife and his living children in his truck, Chris Watts drove into the dawn, prepared to commit further atrocities to conceal his initial crime. Upon arrival at the oil site, Chris first disposed of Shanann's body, burying her in a shallow grave he dug in the hard earth. Then he turned his attention to his daughters. Celeste, just 3 years old, was smothered with her favorite blue blanket. Bella, 4, witnessed her sister's murder. According to Chris, Bella's last words were a plea, "Daddy, no." He then smothered Bella with the same blanket. Chris Watts then dropped the small bodies of his daughters into separate oil tanks, hoping their remains would be submerged and concealed by the crude oil. He then went about his workday as if nothing had happened, even calling Shanann's doctor to cancel a scheduled appointment for her and texting Nichol Kessinger. By mid-morning on August 13, 2018, Shanann Watts, Bella Watts, Celeste Watts, and their unborn son, Nico, were dead. Chris Watts had systematically annihilated his entire family, believing he had committed the perfect crime and cleared the path for his new life. He was grievously mistaken. Later that morning, Monday, August 13th, Nichol Atkinson grew increasingly worried. Shanann, who was always meticulously responsive, wasn't answering her calls or texts. She had a doctor's appointment that morning, which Nichol knew she wouldn't miss, especially being pregnant. Unable to reach Shanann, Nichol contacted Chris. He claimed Shanann had left with the girls earlier that morning for a playdate, though he couldn't recall the friend's name. This vague and unconvincing story amplified Nichol's alarm. At 1:40 p.m., she officially reported Shanann and the children missing to the Frederick Police Department. Police entered the home. There were no overt signs of a struggle. Shanann's cell phone, purse, and keys were found inside. Her wedding ring was on the nightstand. Chris Watts arrived, feigning concern and confusion. He stuck to his story that Shanann had taken the children and left. Over the next 48 hours, Chris Watts played the part of the distraught husband and father. He gave interviews to local news stations, pleading for his family's safe return. While Chris was making his public appeals, investigators were working diligently. They interviewed friends and family, learning about the marital problems and Shanann's pregnancy. They also spoke to Nichol Kessinger, who, upon realizing the gravity of the situation and that Chris had lied to her extensively, began cooperating fully with law enforcement. A key piece of evidence came from a neighbor, Nate Tranastic. His home security camera captured footage of Chris Watts backing his work truck into his driveway early Monday morning and loading items into it. While the figures were indistinct, the timing was suspicious and contradicted Chris's claims. Investigators were closing in. They noted inconsistencies in Chris's story, his calm demeanor, and the information Kessinger provided about their affair and his desire for a fresh start. The FBI was called in to assist. On Wednesday, August 15th, investigators asked Chris to take a polygraph examination. He agreed, perhaps believing he could deceive the test just as he had deceived so many others. Confronted with the damning results of the polygraph, the carefully constructed wall of lies Chris Watts had built around himself began to crumble. The time for deception was over. The horrifying truth was about to be revealed. Late in the evening of August 15th, after failing the polygraph, Chris Watts was confronted by investigators. His demeanor shifted. The facade of the worried husband cracked, revealing glimpses of the man underneath. He asked to speak with his father, Ronnie Watts, who was waiting at the police station. In a conversation with his father, with investigators listening, Chris Watts offered his first confession. But it was not the full truth. It was a self-serving, blame-shifting narrative designed to mitigate his own culpability. Chris claimed that after he told Shanann he wanted a separation, she flew into a rage and strangled Bella and Celeste. He alleged that he then, in a fit of retaliatory rage, strangled Shanann. He admitted to disposing of their bodies at the Anadarko oil site. Despite the implausibility of this account, it provided investigators with critical information: the location of the bodies. In the early hours of August 16th, Chris Watts accompanied law enforcement to the Survey 319 oil site. The scene was grim. Investigators first located the shallow grave where Shanann Watts was buried. Her body was found wrapped in a bedsheet. The recovery was painstaking and emotionally wrenching for all involved. Then came the even more horrifying task of recovering the children. The oil tanks had to be drained. First, Celeste's small body was retrieved, then Bella's. The method of their disposal was a final, brutal act of desecration. With the bodies recovered, the narrative Chris had spun, that Shanann was responsible for the children's deaths, quickly unraveled under scrutiny. The evidence at the scene, combined with autopsy findings, would later point directly to Chris as the sole perpetrator of all three murders. Over the following weeks and months, during further interviews and eventually in a detailed confession, from prison after his conviction, the fuller, more accurate, and even more disturbing sequence of events emerged. Chris Watts admitted that he had killed Shanann first, after an argument about their separation. He confessed that Bella and Celeste were alive when he drove them to the oil site with their mother's body. He described how Bella witnessed him smothering Celeste with her favorite blanket. He recounted Bella's final, heartbreaking words: "Is the same thing gonna happen to me as Cece?" And then, "Daddy, no," before he murdered her too. The initial blame-shifting story was a lie, a cowardly attempt to escape the full weight of his monstrous actions. The truth, when it finally emerged in its entirety, was a chilling testament to the depths of his betrayal and brutality. On August 21, 2018, Chris Watts was formally charged with multiple counts of first-degree murder, unlawful termination of a pregnancy, and tampering with deceased human bodies. The community of Frederick, and indeed the nation, was reeling from the horror. The question on everyone's mind was, why? What could drive a seemingly normal husband and father to annihilate his entire family? Investigators and experts pointed to a confluence of factors. The affair with Nichol Kessinger was undoubtedly a primary motivator. Chris Watts saw her as his escape route, his chance at a life free from the responsibilities he had come to resent. Kessinger herself told investigators that Chris seemed obsessed with starting over. Financial pressures, though denied by Chris as a major factor in the murders themselves, certainly contributed to the overall stress in the household. The Watts family was living beyond their means, and the image of success Shanann projected online likely added to Chris's feelings of inadequacy or resentment. Chris Watts also expressed a feeling of being controlled or suffocated by Shanann, a narrative common among abusive men seeking to justify their actions. However, evidence, including Shanann's texts to friends, painted a picture of a woman desperately trying to save her marriage and understand her husband's sudden coldness. Ultimately, Chris Watts's motive appears to be a deeply selfish desire to erase his current life, his wife, his children, his unborn son, to pursue a new one without the messiness of divorce or shared custody. He chose murder as his solution. To avoid a lengthy and potentially gruesome trial, and to spare Shanann's family further trauma, the Weld County District Attorney's Office, after consulting with the Razuchek family, offered Chris Watts a plea deal. In exchange for pleading guilty to all charges, he would be spared the death penalty. On November 19, 2018, Chris Watts was sentenced to 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole, 3 consecutive and 2 concurrent, plus an additional 48 years for the unlawful termination of pregnancy and 36 years for tampering with deceased bodies. Following his sentencing, Chris Watts was moved to an out-of-state correctional facility, Dodge Correctional Institution in Waupun, Wisconsin, for security reasons. He spends his days in protective custody. The aftermath of the Watts family murders sent shockwaves far beyond Frederick, Colorado. It became a case study in domestic violence, deception, and the dark side of social media's curated realities. It served as a horrifying reminder that evil can lurk behind the most ordinary of facades. Shanann's family, the Rucheks, have endured unimaginable grief. They have advocated for victims of domestic violence and work to keep the memories of Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico alive, focusing on the love and joy they brought to the world rather than the darkness that consumed their killer. The full truth of what transpired in Chris Watts's mind may forever remain elusive, a complex tapestry of narcissism, deceit, and a profound lack of empathy. But the facts of his actions are undeniable, a stark and tragic testament to a dream that became a nightmare, and a family destroyed by the one person who should have protected them most.